Okay, here we go. Darren, we're starting with you. Yeah, this is on. How does Weber Basin deal with water priority dates, with water right priority dates?
So, as far as the state of Utah, I mean, first in time, first in right. And so, as I mentioned, we are a junior water right priority holder on the system since we came in 1950. There are a lot of irrigation companies that have earlier rights than us. I mean, over time, we have continued to purchase earlier water rights. We are a major shareholder of the Davis and Weber Canal Company that has very, very early rights in Echo and East Canyon. We probably own 35% of the shares in that company now. We just continue to purchase additional shares as they become available. But yeah, as far as our water rights, I mean, we're going to be cut just as easily as anybody else will be when the drought does occur. And that's why we're trying to get as many of these agreements in place with these early water right holders. I mean, another one is Hooper Irrigation, Wilson Irrigation. We do own shares or water rights in those companies, and we continue to operate a secondary water system out in the West Haven area, which has a lot of Hooper Wilson Irrigation water rights. And the hope would be is that as we cut, these irrigation rights by 20–40%, then that water could be redirected to our treatment plants, and we could treat that water for drinking water purposes. And so as we continue to facilitate and work with irrigation companies and continue to purchase additional shares, we have more flexibility in the future to try to direct that water to our water treatment plants when necessary. So,
okay. This one is for Stephanie. How have you incorporated the county hazard mitigation plans? If not, how do you plan to incorporate those?
That's a really good question. So we do have a number of plans from the county. Someone gave me a copy of they have a plan actually on impacts of climate on public health, and we're working on incorporating some of those, their recommendations for mitigation and response actions into our plans. I hadn't included that particular plan in part because I thought it mostly was addressing flood, but we will certainly look at it. We're trying to find as many different discrete plans as possible because of the complexity of our service area being that it's not just in Salt Lake City. Whatever we do affects our customers in the county, and we want to make sure that what we do is relevant to them as well. So thanks for the heads up on that one, and I'll check it out.
Okay, thank you. Dave, this one's for you. How good are the outlooks months out? What percentage of success do they have of actually predicting?
Well, I don't have any actual statistics on that, but my observation is that it's obviously the further you go out, the less reliable they are. But it really depends on the region you're in, how accurate they are, the part of the United States. I think for the West, it's more of a challenge as you go out, like in the 3-month time frame. Because of obviously ENSO-related factors and how that plays out as far as precipitation. I think temperature is the forecasts on those. The outlooks are pretty accurate. But precipitation, like this year, the outlooks were pretty decent. The year prior with the super El Nino we had, they really missed it for parts of the West. I mean, they were way off. And then there's certain areas of the West, depending on your geographic location, like for us in like Reno, Tahoe area, Northern California, Western Nevada, we're in this kind of transition area. And basically, the models just don't work really well for our particular area. So I like as I showed you, the NMME. It's an ensemble. That's something else that I would take a look at. and then you can take a look at all the different models under that and see how much variation you're seeing between the models or agreement, and that may give you a better idea. But overall, I still think they're working on that, getting that down.
Okay. Another one for you, Dave. Explain the difference between Quickdry and EDDI for flash drought monitoring.
They're looking at just the input parameters that go into it are slightly different. With excuse me, evaporative demand, you're integrating temperature and wind speed and soil moisture, and the difference between that and like Quickdry is also looking at NDVI, so you're looking at the vegetation. So there's little difference in the input parameters, but I think one of the input parameters in Quickdry is evaporative demand as well. But I would say if you're looking more at vegetation, you might want to take a look at Quickdry, but just some little differences in the input parameters.
Okay. Darren, when you activated your plan, how was it received, and what pushback did you get?
Okay, so we have not activated our plan yet. We are still in the throes of completing the plan. We have a draft plan we're currently reviewing, but we have not, implemented the plan necessarily because we still need to get. Maybe I'm in trouble for presenting some of this material today. We haven't completed all the approvals with the Bureau of Reclamation yet to help fund the plan, but I think we're okay today. So we have not implemented it yet, but with the task force members, that we've had and our advisory council and all the input that we received from those individuals, I think obviously we're going to have good buy-in from those people because they helped us create the plan. I think the issue is going to come from probably the ag community. As I mentioned, we interviewed several farmers here recently to try to get a better idea of how receptive they would be to these different agreements. And we were not really well received, I guess, by the farmers. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in that area still. I mean, I think we need to do a lot of our own homework in terms of drafting up what these agreements would look like. We probably will have them kind of on retainer. In other words, we will pay them every year to have them be part of this program. And then in years where we actually do have a drought, we need to save water, then obviously they will get paid for, fallowing, their lands. And so it'll probably be something where they're going to be on retainer every year if we make an agreement with that farmer. And so I think the ag community, I think is that they're willing, but I think we have a long ways to go still before we actually have an agreement that they will sign and say, hey, this is what we will do, in terms of turning our water over, to the public or to the district in order to treat it. So. But other than that, I think with everyone that we've worked with, for the most part, it's been very well received so far in terms of, developing the plan itself. But we have not actually put it out there on the street yet. So.
Okay. So everyone here, consider yourself privileged that you got to see it before it's really released. So there we go. This is Darren and Stephanie, and it's related to the direction you went with that, Darren. Do your plans call for collaboration with your neighboring communities, and how is that integrated?
Yes, as I mentioned, I think that was one of the really successful points of our plan, was to be able to reach out to the neighboring communities and to be able to talk with them about a lot of the things that we're thinking about. So that included our irrigation companies, state water agencies, cities. As we've gone through this process, a lot of the cities have a lot of their own water rights that they, have developed. and they continue to supply. And so they're a big part of this, plan as well. How are they going to react, with their own supplies? What are they going to do? And we're just starting kind of those discussions with the cities. Even though they have large contracts with Weber Basin, we're a wholesale water provider. We provide water to the cities. Cities have a lot of water themselves. And so how are they going to treat that water in a drought? And are they going to be, on board? And so far, I mean, things have been really well received. But we did not, go to and talk to, each one of our cities necessarily directly about the drought plan. But I think we have a pretty good feeling of where our cities sit in general in terms of their willingness to cooperate during a drought scenario. So.
One is we have the Public Utility Advisory Committee, which is a standing committee. It's actually been in existence since the 1920s, that meets monthly, and the individuals are appointed by the mayor and the city council, and they serve 4-year terms. And they represent not only communities within Salt Lake City's the political area, the geopolitical boundary, but we have representatives on the PUAC from Cottonwood Heights, Holiday, Mill Creek, and from the county at large, so that we have those voices in. And so as we do updates to the plan, they're being directly informed. In our drought planning process, we also have additional representation for each of those agents, those cities, in our planning process directly. So they're providing information back to their administrative and political leaders. Additionally to that, our communication plan addresses specifically doing outreach to those communities. Salt Lake City has a pretty well-constructed and institutionally accepted community council network. So it's pretty typical for us to make the rounds to the community councils and present information and get feedback from the community and solicit input. These other cities don't have necessarily as well-developed community council systems. So one of the categories of development from the Bureau of Reclamation is a administrative and operational framework for the drought plan, which is intended to be the outline of how we actually implement the drought plan. And within that administrative and operational framework is the communication plan. And both of those documents will have very specific guidelines of how we interact with our cities, so that we know who the points of contact are, when information gets passed along, how we receive information from those cities, and also the frequency of that. So one of the last components we have to put together for our drought plan is this administrative framework. So we're working on those details right now, but it's going to be very important for our success, given the number of our customers that are outside of our city boundary. If we're going to meet reduction goals as responses to triggers, then we need to have their buy-in. So yes, they are an integral part of both our standing PUAC, the planning process itself, and the administrative framework and communication plan.
Thank you. Elizabeth, you're not getting off the hook today. What kind of information would be helpful to the regional DEWS?
Information from...
Who asked this question? Oh. Just...
Did you ask about, you wanted input?
I had asked in my presentation for a couple things. One is your feedback on drought.gov to make sure that the website addresses your needs, and where there are opportunities to participate in the larger regional activities, just as the drought coordinators from New Mexico, Colorado, and Arizona helped share their experience and information with you, where there are opportunities, if we're having another workshop, say in Arizona, that you share your experiences and your knowledge, that as we move forward with the drought planning process in Utah, that you're open to documenting and sharing the lessons learned. Is that what somebody was asking?
I think actually yes, because when I look at the follow-up questions, it's along that same line.
Okay.
So.
I guess similarly too, I think it's always what I hear a lot from other states is that they'd love to hear how people are making decisions around drought, what information you're using, what triggers you're using, whether it's drought planning for water suppliers or the state level. People are always interested in knowing like what's working elsewhere. So if you could think about that, and like NIDIS is happy to support another workshop like this across state lines if that's useful to you. And I would just encourage you to share what you're learning as you're moving through this process and making Utah more drought resilient. Your learning can help others be more drought resilient in the region.
Okay, keep that mic. So following up with that, they asked, is NIDIS available to help draft a drought plan and to review during the planning effort?
Well, keep in mind that there's one of me for the Intermountain West and the Southern Plains. But I would actually also say that those skill sets rest better at the National Drought Mitigation Center. I think like Cody and others have worked a lot on drought planning and probably would be better positioned to provide that kind of support. If there's additional needs where NIDIS can help support financially, we can certainly talk about that. Okay. Is that an okay answer, Cody, that I just put that on your desk?
Dave, are there any resources or guidelines that are available to help make analysis in the case where where we have limited data, or it's from courses, data collection that doesn't have great spatial resolution?
I think if I understand the question correctly, I think in those particular areas where we have limited data available, observational data, that's where we rely on a lot of the satellite-based data sets have been really useful to kind of fill the gaps on that. But again, as I kind of mentioned in using some of the cautions and using these data sets as with soil moisture data, model data, it's nice to have some ground truthing, to be able to have some actual observational data on the ground, be it actual data or people on the ground telling you, verifying those conditions are actually happening. But again, I think that's where the satellite data is really coming into play to fill those gaps.
Are there people at the Drought Monitor that are available for consultation? So if we had specific questions, that there's somebody to contact and bounce ideas off of, or?
Yeah, I mean, on the U.S. Drought Monitor website, under contacts, all the authors' email addresses are on there. And I mean, we're fielding questions all the time from people regarding data or whatever. You're welcome to contact us. And we're, unlike perhaps some federal agencies, and trying to contact people is really difficult. The authors are pretty responsive in getting back to people quickly.
Great. This one's for Elizabeth. From what you've seen, how would you recommend the state proceed with stakeholder involvement, and what are the stakeholders' roles?
Oh, that's a good question. Proceeding. I think it's always useful in a process like this that you have multiple layers of groups. So you have kind of a steering committee comprised of those who are going to push the process forward, and those who will reach out to a much broader stakeholder group to be interacting with them And the stakeholder groups need to represent multiple sectors and multiple scales across the state. But you can't have everybody involved in every single decision as you move forward. So you have to have some smaller steering committee that's moving the process forward, but engaging in outreach with the various stakeholder groups across the different sectors. I think you have a great representation here to start with, and then you can rely on these folks too to reach out to their broader networks. But I think constantly checking back with, do you have the sectors represented, and do you have the different scales across the state represented? And I apologize, I forgot that second question already. There was a second question that you had.
Oh, her mic went out.
What is the stakeholders' role?
Well, I think that's actually been tackled quite a bit in this discussion, particularly the question around water usage, it's critical to be engaging stakeholders who are ultimately the users of water, and they have a key role in making sure that they are adjusting their water demand and water usage in times of drought. I think that that's only one sector, though. We really have to also consider, say, the ecological impacts of drought, and is that, how are we representing environmental interests, or the interests of the environment, I should say. And so I think that it's really important to be thinking about, when I talk about multiple sectors, I'm talking about tourism, I'm talking about M&I, I'm talking about the environmental aspects of drought, and making sure that their needs are all addressed in a drought plan and their concerns are being addressed, while also recognizing that everybody's not going to get what they want necessarily. A drought will have major impacts on how we are living our lives, and people need to be cognizant of the changes that might need to be made.
Darren, this one's for you. How did you get a grant for the Drought Dashboard?
So as far as the dashboard is concerned, I mean, we had an engineering firm that had previously done this for another irrigation district in Oregon. And I think it was Water Resources that kind of helped direct this firm to us, and knew that we were doing some of this work already with the drought contingency plan. And so this firm told us, basically what they could do and how they could help us with the dashboard. And as we interviewed them, we felt like that would be a good fit for the district, and that they could kind of take this part that kind of fell out of the drought contingency plan for us. And with Water Resources' help, I mean, they're gonna help us on this as well, and we really appreciate all their help. But it was really based on the work that they had done previously for another water district in Oregon, and we felt like that they would be the right group suited. And you have to have a lot of IT type of experience, a lot of computer programmers, and just a general engineering firm here, may not have that expertise. I mean, you're looking for, folks with a lot of SCADA experience as well to be able to tie into all of our SCADA facilities. And so it was a little kind of a different niche that we're typically looking for than straight engineering. And we felt like this firm had the IT and the computer programming abilities to be able to pull all this information into a dashboard for us, and then make it both available to our operation personnel, and then have another system for the public to be able to access and to just access that information. And so again, we're just kicking this project off, and I think we've got 18 months to complete it, but we're excited about this dashboard project as well.
Thank you. Stephanie, how can Salt Lake consider water reuse in the context of the negative impact that it will have to the Great Salt Lake?
Well, as I mentioned in our presentation, we're actually looking at water reuse's role in our drought plan as supporting environmental constituencies. So we're actually not looking at it as a supply to supplement our culinary water as much as its role in helping us to sustain our environmental ecosystems, both within the city itself in terms of stream flow in our creeks, our wetland stormwater facilities, treatment facilities, and flows into the Jordan River past the water treatment plant to the Great Salt Lake. So that's actually how we're looking at its best value for us.
Darren, this one's back to you. Why did you use reservoir storage as a parameter for triggering your drought response, and how did you determine what those levels for each reservoir were?
So that was, that was a difficult part of the plan, is trying to determine what those different response levels should be in terms of how much reservoir storage that we do have. And so for us, a big part of how much water do we have to deliver to the individual or the customer is based on how much storage we have. I mean, we do have a lot of run-of-the-river sort of rights, but as we talked about earlier, those rights are going to be cut, during a drought scenario. And so, maybe you can rely on 50% of those rights, if that, or maybe less. And so we have to fall back to storage. So we really felt like storage was the big component that would tell us, how much water we had available in a given year. And then we're always trying to assess what that June 1st storage number is going to be. Even in March, we're trying to assess, we're looking at, all the different forecasts that are put out there, NRCS and others, and trying to determine what is that June 1st number, because as our board, they have to make that decision in March, for the future, for the irrigation season. So you are continually forecasting that, because the irrigation season essentially starts April 15th for the most part. So we try to provide all that information to our board so that they can make that decision in March in terms of what the cuts will be, whether the irrigation season will end early that year, and that's really based on our storage. So we felt like the biggest component that we really needed to lean on was the storage that we had. And a lot can happen between March and June 1st, right? We know, I think it was 2014, things were looking really dire as far as our snowpack was concerned. But then, I think it was 2015, then we got all those spring rains in May that really, I remember the board meeting in April, we're like, oh man, we're really hurting, as far as what we're gonna need to do. But then May, we just got hammered with all those spring rains, and that just really helped out. I mean, we were gonna start pumping water from Willard Bay in April in 2015, and that hardly ever happens. I mean, usually we can wait till a little towards the end of the season before we have to start pumping water south from Willard Bay to fulfill all of our ag demands. And so it's just situations like that, you can't really forecast that, and you don't know what's going to happen. But that was a huge deal in 2015 to have all those spring rains and help offset some of the storage limitations that we had back then. So,
Thank you. Dave, what data information is needed from Utah, after calling us out yesterday, to improve the USDM depiction of drought in this state?
Well, I would, any information would be helpful, just as a starting point. I'll recognize the River Forecast Center folks, we get some input occasionally from them. I think because obviously you've got good representation here from various water districts and so forth, so that kind of information, if there's issues when you're going into some sort of drought response and you're cutting back on water to the public or so forth, we'd like to know about that type of thing. But also, since Utah has so much of the state has managed federal lands, it's really important that we get information from the big players like the BLM and the U.S. Forest Service. So we'd like to know more about grazing conditions in the state, but as well as, like Elizabeth had mentioned, some of the less clear impacts are the ecological impacts. You don't hear a whole lot about them, and they're hard to measure. And we've seen some, with the recent drought, the 3 to 4 year drought in California, the long-term impacts of the drought, even though the drought ended, we had this record year of snowpack, precipitation at the end of it that brought us out of it. But the long-term impacts from the drought, really you could see them in the forests because it really stressed the trees out in the forests. And that stress on the trees made them susceptible to insect infestations. So they had big bark beetle outbreaks. And we paired up with the U.S. Forest Service. They have folks who do aerial overflights and use remote sensing to make calculations of how many square miles of forests have been impacted by like bark beetle infestations, so tree mortality. And they had about 40 million trees die in California because of that. And what are the consequences of that? It's hard to, tell what that's actually going to be, but obviously you have increased fire danger. It impacts wildlife. It could impact things like stream flow temperatures, which impact fisheries. It can also just, on a very basic level, impact the energy balance of the forest and the climate of the forest. You remove all these trees, it's going to have impacts on surface temperature and a variety of other things. So I think getting that input from field offices, or some states like in Nevada, like the BLM state office has somebody who runs all the grazing allotments, who's like the point person for that. So to make contact with that individual or individuals from the Forest Service, like through the research stations, through the Forest Service, like the Rocky Mountain Research Station, I think has an office here in Ogden, Utah. But to make those type of contacts, to be able to get feedback from those particular agencies. So we'd like to know more about what's going on.
Thank you. Okay. This one is for Stephanie and Darren. And this was the perfect segue, so thank you, David, for that. What other federal agencies do you interact with as part of your drought planning process?
Well, we're working with the Bureau of Reclamation. We are working with the U.S. Forest Service because they are a stakeholder and partner in our watershed management plan update, which is also, we're working to mesh that with our drought planning process. And I think at the moment, those are the two agencies that are federal that I can think of in terms of the drought plan specifically. I mean, we just learned about a lot of great resources that are national resources. I don't think of those as federal agencies that we are planning to reference and resource.
I was trying to think if we've, dealt with anybody else but the BOR and Forest Service,
EPA,
Yeah, the EPA potentially, could be one that we've. Yeah, the WaterSense folks. Yeah, that's true.
Good data.
Yeah.
USGS. We're thinking of stuff here now.
Okay, good.
Army Corps of Engineers. There was just like a moment. There was just a moment of yeah.
State agencies just keep coming to mind of the state agencies that we've dealt with, on the plan, but yeah, USGS in some form or fashion, for sure. But that's probably about it, yeah. I'm not thinking of any others.
Okay, will you hand it back to Stephanie and Elizabeth too? Which other ones did you guys come up with brainstorming there?
Go ahead.
No, it was your question.
Nice. So it was the USGS, the EPA WaterSense, in part because they have data on how people use water, which can help us make determinations in terms of the response aspects and also achieving reductions during specific triggers. And then Army Corps of Engineers and I think that's it.
The Army Corps is the one that I couldn't remember. I knew I'd heard but didn't hear. So, okay, great. Elizabeth, this is for you. How do we support NIDIS to make sure that this program continues?
This program being NIDIS? Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, that's an interesting question because we are up for reauthorization this year. And I wouldn't anticipate that there'd be any challenges with reauthorization. There's tremendous bipartisan support for NIDIS. Drought's something that seems to affect us bipartisanly. Yeah, another word invented. But it is a good question. I think that NIDIS values your support in the sense of making sure that your legislators and your governor and the Western Governors Association group understand what NIDIS is doing to support Utah and other states in the region. So if you just share what we've been doing together, how we collaborate together, and what value that is to you in this state, that's very welcome. So thank you for that question.
Stephanie, question for you about Salt Lake City and that area is pretty well built out, not completely, but has lower capacity for population growth. So in light of that,
Except for a whole prison and the inland port and, yeah.
okay, is future population growth less of an issue? And I think we already head this direction. And drought planning for Salt Lake City compared to the rest of the Wasatch Front?
Actually, no. In the 2010 census, surprisingly, Salt Lake City grew faster population-wise than did Sandy. So we experienced a percentage growth greater than 2%. The other issue we have in terms of population, though we may not, and there's a lot of densification happening in our downtown, both our core downtown and the outer downtown area, where we're greatly increasing the number of household or residential properties in terms of multifamily dwellings. Now, you might think that innately a multifamily dwelling, an apartment building, uses less water somehow than, say, a lawn. But these buildings are replacing other buildings that were commercial properties. So, say, a little local grocery store or a auto mechanic shop is being torn down, and a 10-story high-rise with 75 units is being built. Well, that new densification is going to definitely increase the water use at that meter than what we had previously. So the densification isn't replacing lawn and other high water users. It's creating water use where we didn't have any. So growth is going to be a factor. The other part of it is something else we learned in the 2010 census was that in the United States, one of the things they look at in terms of census questions was not just where do people live, but where do they work. And in the 2010 census, we learned that of all the cities in the United States, every single city, all cities, they divided cities into 3 size categories. Salt Lake City is in the middle size category. Of those cities, we have the highest ratio of commuter population to our residential population in the entire country. So every single day, a population equivalent to 50% of our population comes into our city, and they work, and they go to school, and they recreate, and they use our hospitals, and we're really grateful for that. But that's water use that's a little difficult to judge, and it's a little difficult to educate on. So growth is a big issue for us in terms of direct water use within our service area and on our water sources. Additionally, one of our primary water supplies is the Wasatch watershed. A lot of that growth that happens here, those people go and recreate along the Wasatch. And that recreation, those development pressures and all of that has a direct impact on not just water quantity, but water quality. And that will affect what might happen during a drought. So population is a big issue for us. And again, we're now going to be the host of a 5,000 people prison and an inland port. So there is actually a fair amount of new growth development pressure on our water system to be considered. Fun times.
Okay. Darren, you didn't mention your ASR program in your presentation. Are you continuing with that project, and is it expanding?
Yes, we are continuing with the ASR project. As far as the Aquifer Storage and Recovery Project, hopefully everybody knows what that means, but we are storing water in the ground. We deliver water over the surface, and it percolates down into the groundwater aquifers. And the limitation we have, I guess, with the ASR facility is we need more water rights. We have enough land right now. In fact, we purchased additional properties in that area to continue to expand this project. But the issue is we need more water right. Obviously, when the river's at high flows, we can store a lot of water, and that's fine, but typically that's not for very long. In flood, then it goes to high, and then it hits our water right, and then once it goes to low, our low water right on that facility is about 3.5 CFS. It's about 6.5 CFS in high, and then in flood, we can take as much as we can, but it hits that 3.5 CFS level at about, depending on the year, it's probably 5th of July, 10th of July, just depends on the river. And so from, first part of July till the end of the season, we're only storing about 3.5 CFS. And so we really could use some additional water rights to help us, and we could store more water in the ground, which then helps us because we recently raised Willard Bay 2 feet, and that's 20,000 acre feet. So, that's essentially 3 Causey reservoirs, for us, or 2.5 Smith and Morehouse reservoirs just to raise Willard Bay 2 feet. But it took us approximately 10 years to get the approval process through the feds in order to raise it to. We were originally trying for 5 feet, try to get 50,000 acre feet. And over the course of that 10 years, the best we could do was a 2-foot raise. And there's a lot of complicating factors to that. But even with 2 feet, that's 20,000 acre feet that we can store in a reservoir. But we do have more capacity to store underground if we had the water rights available to do so. So that's really the limitation for us right now. But we continue to utilize that project and store water as quickly as we can if we had more water rights. So.
Everybody else on the panel, you guys can sit back and relax here because all of these other questions are focused for Darren. Actually, at the very end, I have a few more for everyone. But Darren, what form of messaging was used at the advisory response level, and how well did that messaging work?
When we selected our advisory group, we basically earmarked these individuals that we felt like would be helpful to us on the advisory group. So it wasn't just a blanket, advertisement to have anybody that wanted to be part of the advisory group to come in. We actually, as a team, we thought about individuals that would be helpful and would be beneficial to the process of advising us on a drought response, a drought contingency plan. So we basically, went out and that was okay to do. That was part of the process. So it wasn't just an open invitation. We actually earmarked individuals that we felt like, and we wanted to get a good cross-section of individuals, both from the private sector. We wanted to make sure that we got Great Salt Lake Minerals, Compass Minerals, folks, from the private sector, as well as our different, state agencies, as well as our cities. several of our cities, which are large water users for Weber Basin, were part of that advisory. And you got the task force and you got the advisory group. You got two groups. The task force we worked a little more closely with and had a few more meetings with, but the advisory group was kind of the larger group, and we had meetings with both groups there at the same time to get their input. So it wasn't just an open invitation for the advisory group. So we still felt like, we have 40, 50 people in the room. We still had to be productive in the 2 hours that we had there to be able to accomplish what we were trying to do. So we couldn't just have a blanket open-ended and not accomplish what we were trying to do. So.
Okay. How do you separate M&I indoor and outdoor when there's a drought and you have to make cuts to the culinary water use?
Yeah, that's a good question. Difficult to do with 1 meter, both indoor and outdoor, and the same question could be asked. How are you going to cut secondary water use, right, without a meter on secondary systems? I mean, so it's impossible, to do that on a secondary system. With the culinary system, indoor, outdoor, I mean, you basically have to put that out there that we're going to cut outdoor M&I use by whatever it is, 40%. And then for the most part, people have to kind of police themselves. I mean, you can go, what they've been using over the years. You can see their water use. And even though they say, well, we filled the swimming pool or whatever, well, we're not supposed to be filling swimming pools right now, or whatever that is. But the secondary water use, we have to get that metered. Otherwise, how are you ever going to have anybody cut back if nothing is measured? And so that's why, part of the reason why we're moving as quickly as we are on that secondary system metering, because otherwise we can't cut it back, so.
There was a question about how do you mandate that, but I think you addressed that one. So the next one is, have you encountered any legal impediments to drought surcharge fees?
So, again, we have not implemented the drought surcharge fees yet. And I think we're still, we could definitely do something on the wholesale side right now to our cities, and because we do charge them on take or pay contracts. I think the drought surcharge fees is more meant for, the residents, the population. And for us, Weber Basin, we have 18,000 secondary water connections retail in our system. There's 105,000 retail secondary connections in the Weber and Davis County areas. So we're only a small portion of those, retail services. But those drought fees are meant for on a retail basis for those individuals, and it's going to be a process, because first, we got to get everything metered, then we have to start charging for the water that goes through that meter on a regular basis, and then we can implement drought surcharge fees. So are we going to get pushback from individuals or legally? Stephanie was asking me that same question. Maybe that was your question, Stephanie. She was asking me that same question during the break, if we ran into issues like that, because she was telling me that Denver Water has ran into problems like that. And so obviously we haven't yet, because we haven't implemented those, but that's good to know that possibility is out there and that we need to keep our eyes open.
Okay. Do you, and this one's Stephanie and Darren, but also Elizabeth and Dave, do you have recommendations for other agencies about your process and how you would recommend that they proceed in the process, or something that you would do differently if you were to start over?
I'll just real quick say, because I've been talking enough, but when we first started this project, one of the questions from other staff members was, is this really going to be a benefit to the district, or is this just a bunch of work that we're going to have to go through to get to the point where we want to be? And I felt like, because of the low water storage years that we had, that that's a definite possibility in the future. And unless we start to put something in place and actually define what these response levels should be as far as the district is concerned, we're really not going to benefit ourselves. So yes, was it a lot of work? Yes, it was. Like Stephanie said, herding really smart cats or intelligent cats. Yes, it was. I mean, these people really know their business and they know what they're doing. And so we had to get their input. Was that a lot of work to set up all those meetings and get all those people to come out and then to manage them, when you got 50 people in the room that really know what they're talking about and have specific opinions about things? Yes, that was a big process to go through. But in the end, we felt like it was worth it. And even though there's some headache involved, it was definitely worth it for us. So,
what Darren said, but also I think if I don't know that I've been through this process enough to feel good about making recommendations. But if I were, in terms of what our own experience has been, one is figure it's going to take longer than you think. It's going to take long. Just accept it. It's going to take longer than you think. It's going to take more brain power than just you have. This plan is going to be infinitely better because I've engaged all these other stakeholders. And I'm looking around the room, and a lot of you are in here, and I'm so grateful for that. The first drought plan, its shortage was not just that we didn't consider things like mitigation and such, but that it was really written in a very small room with very few voices. The value of this drought plan will be that as we take it out to the public, we can say honestly and earnestly that it has a lot of voices in it, not just agencies and water experts, but it has sociologists and public health experts and environmental scientists and a lot of really important critical voices in our community. And having those voices in the process not only gives us as a utility more confidence in that document, but it will also bring added value to our community and I think enhance their ability to embrace that document and therefore live that and be successful when we need to do drought, when we need to actually, the thing about that plan and what you have to remember as you work through your plan, in the end, it has to work. I mean, if we're in a drought stage and we have to reduce water use to get to the next year or the next year or the year after that, it has to work. And this is really important work that we're doing. So this isn't busy work. It's not irrelevant. It has to work. And so do what you need to do to bring the people to the table because the work we're doing has to work. Now it's your turn.
Thank you. Well, I think you guys covered all the bases. I'm going to just add one point that's actually not directed at the question, but is something that I believe is very important, and it speaks to what you said, Stephanie, about voices, in that it's always easier for engagement processes and stakeholder engagement to involve those who are politically strong, who are financially well off, who are economically powerful. And we always need to think about how we're engaging those who don't have a political voice and who don't have money and who are poorer, who are incarcerated, as Darren reminded us, as well as, as I mentioned earlier, Stephanie mentioned the environment, which doesn't often have enough of a place at the table. It's always much harder to engage those. It's always so much more difficult, so much more time consuming, and it's so much easier to just kind of say, well, we'll deal with that later, because it's hard. So I just would ask that as you move forward to think about how you are incorporating those powerless voices.
Right on.
I'm not sure I have an actual recommendation, but more of an observation that, as others and Elizabeth had mentioned, that drought impacts many people, different sectors. It impacts pretty much everybody when it's occurring. And I think this whole process in working with drought over the years that I've seen is that this is like an example of like government working. You know, this is a real good positive example of joining together of the federal government with local, tribal, you know, the different federal agencies to get people working together, you know, for the good of, you know, the people of the state. So I think it's a real good opportunity to build networks and do good things for our state.
Okay, last question, because this is the last one that's standing between us and lunch. What is your one wish if you could have the state support you in, and I'm going to add NIDIS into this, or the Drought Monitor, our agencies here that are represented. What would be the thing that would have helped you in developing your plan, that we could have supported you in better?
You get to start.
Well, I felt like, Water Resources, from the get-go, we asked them if they could help support us and do a lot of the modeling effort with the riverware model that they had. And they were very good to say, yes, we'll go ahead and support you and do the modeling. I mean, Water Resources has the experts to be able to do this. You know, they have the knowledge. And so they were so accommodating and helpful throughout the process to help us. So I really don't have to say, hey, I wish they would have done this, because they really did everything we asked them to do.
Darren's a plant. We're paying him for this later.
I mean, Candace was wonderful, and her group, and Scott McGettigan, and I know he's, kind of off the project now, but, and it was really helpful to us, because to have that expertise is huge, and somebody can't just go out there and pay a consultant to be able to do something like that. It would just blow your budget out of the water, as far as the budget that we had. And so in order to be able to do this within the confines of the budget that we were given by the Bureau of Reclamation, that was a huge aspect of the plan that was helpful to us, that Water Resources helped us with. And so I really don't have to. I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, I guess, at this point, because it was just all positive for us.
I'm not going to do that either. I think one was, when we contacted the state about this process, we were very appreciative of how eager they were to come into it. I think if I had a wish about our process, what is the wishes I have aren't anything you guys can help me with. But but if I have a wish, it's that then use us. Invite us into your process. One is we're going to learn. And in the last 2 days, my notebook is filled with really great notes. I've already sent out emails to members of our task force and our internal team about things I've learned at this meeting, and to say, hey, we need to think about this, and did we do this? And I know we talked about this, did we act on it? So we're really learning in this process, and I would say then help us keep this process going by inviting us into your process, so that we can all, bring this group back together so we can keep learning, because it's not just about writing the plan, it's now then working the plan. So help us work the plan then, help us keep on track, help us stay informed, hear us too in your process, and bring us into your process. Help keep this moving is that's my wish. And more peanut butter.
Did you want anything?
No, I think I agree that just to keep the process going, and in terms of the U.S. Drought Monitor, and I guess I could speak for NIDIS a little bit, but just this is something that I've wanted from the Drought Monitor, that Elizabeth and Seth and others have discussed, and so I think this is a really good, positive, first step in the process.
Thank you. So thank you to our panel members. Round of applause. And I would say to the other agencies, water agencies, cities that are in the room today and working on drought plans, that this state is willing and wanting to help support you in your efforts for your drought plan. And do approach us and ask us for any help that we can offer you. Let us know what your needs are, and we will work to try, and if we can't, provide that service to you, to find people that can, and to build those groups together. And then share that information with your colleagues, with your other cities, with your conservancy districts, so that we do get the word out and spread the word so that we're all working toward that common goal and making that improvement.